Hello and welcome to Ask a Pastor. Today's question is, how does Jesus' death save us from our sins? Well, that's a really good question. It's pretty central to everything that the church believes and everything that Christianity is all about. Jesus, we proclaim, was crucified, died, was buried, and rose again. That's part of the Apostles' Creed. It's part of it's central to the whole Christian tradition. Now, the question is, what are the mechanics of that? How does a death save us? Well, there's lots of debate on this. There's some traditions that really emphasize the substitutionary elements of that Jesus took our place and bore the punishment that we deserved, having fallen to sin and death. Some traditions emphasize Jesus' victory over death. There's lots of different kinds of theories. And I think all of these theories, all of these ideas are metaphors for a larger picture that really can't be summed up in one or two metaphors. The way I like to think of it is the most important thing about Jesus' death is, in fact, the incarnation. Goes back to the Christmas story that on the cross, Jesus is God with us. God with us, not just in our victories and in our strength. God with us, not from a distance, just watching us go through hard times and swooping in to save us, but God with us in the midst of our suffering, our pain, our death. Where sin is, there is suffering. Now, sin is not just that we are guilty of doing bad things, and so God needs to justify us, to make us right. God needs to take our punishment. That may be an element of it, of course, but sin is also about our shame, not just guilt, but shame. We need to not only be forgiven, but also accepted. And so Jesus, in dying on the cross on Good Friday, doesn't just forgive us of our sins, but joins us in our shame, our suffering, and bears our guilt. In Jesus, God refuses to let us die alone. Now, there's an apostolic principle. In other words, there's an idea, a theological concept that goes back all the way to the beginning of the early church. And this idea was coined, I think, by Gregory of Nazianzus. And it's the idea that what is assumed is healed, and what is not assumed is not healed. Now, the word assumed there is more like taken on, like when you assume someone else's debt or something. So Jesus, in taking whatever Jesus takes on, whatever God takes on into God's own life and being, that's what's saved. Because the God of life, in bearing death, can only bring life. So God, in Jesus, takes on, bears not only our life, but also our death. Jesus takes our suffering so that we can share in his victory over death. There's a passage in Romans 6 that says, "For if we have been united with him in a death like this, we will certainly also be united with him in a resurrection like his." In other words, Jesus bears our suffering so that he can share with us his resurrection. So it's not just the death, you also need the resurrection, but the death, the Good Friday moment, because of who Jesus is, God with us, because of the incarnation, the Good Friday moment is God's assuming all of our pain, all of our death, all of our guilt, all of our shame. And in so doing, he shares with us his resurrection. In joining with us in solidarity, in being God with us even on the cross, Jesus saves us from our guilt, accepts us in our shame, and loves us just as we are. That is good news. And I think that is, in fact, the good news of the gospel. It's the best news in the world, that there is nothing, nothing, nothing that can separate us from the love of God. Well, I hope that's a helpful answer. There are, of course, many metaphors for the mechanisms of how the death of Christ saves us from our sins. But I hope, at least in seeing this idea of God with us, of God assuming our death to share in resurrection, I hope that gives you a good lens for understanding. And hopefully, this Easter, you're able to celebrate even more fully the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.